Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We would have loved to be in person, but winter had other plans. But never fear, this is one in a series of engagement opportunities we are planning under the Women Fighting Hunger banner. So there will definitely be more chances to be together in person. First of all, we wanted to give a big thank you to Mass Bio for hosting us and to Biogen for their generous support of tonight's event. For more than 15 years, Women Fighting Hunger has brought together business and community leaders to raise awareness about food insecurity and to support the Greater Boston Food Bank's mission to end hunger in Eastern Massachusetts. My name is Anya Schaefer, and my co-chair is Jennifer Harrington, and we are both honored to serve on the Women Fighting Hunger Committee. We're also thrilled to expand Women Fighting Hunger programming. Events like this one tonight provide further opportunities for us to gather, to network, to learn, and to continue raising awareness about food insecurity and its impact. We'll tell you a little bit more about Women Fighting Hunger and how you can get involved at the end of the program. But for now, I'll hand it over to Jen to introduce our program and our wonderful presenters.
Thanks, Anya. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be together, as Anya said, unfortunately not in person, but we're excited about tonight's program. Tonight, we have the great privilege of hearing from Dr. Carlos Bosques and Dr. Andrew Wang of the Food Allergy Science Initiative. But first, I'd like to start by introducing our moderator this evening, Joy McCallum, who serves with us on the Women Fighting Hunger Committee and is also a member of the Greater Boston Food Bank's Board of Advisors, is our moderator this evening. Joy is a registered dietitian and functional nutritionist with a consulting practice specializing in food sensitivities, gastrointestinal issues, wellness, and weight management. Every day, she works to bridge the connection between food and health, which makes her a perfect moderator for tonight's presentation. We're thrilled to have her. Please join me in welcoming Joy McCallum.
Thank you, Anya and Jennifer. I'm delighted to be here with all of you tonight. As a practitioner providing nutrition-focused care to my clients, I have seen how challenges around access to allergen-free foods can compound an already stressful situation for individuals and families. My goal with each client is to create a nutritionally balanced and allergy-friendly plan centered around fresh and single ingredient foods when possible. Knowing that GBFB-supported local food pantries and mobile markets offer a range of healthy, perishable, and allergy-friendly foods is reassuring to my food insecure clients. We cannot talk about food insecurity without talking about the many ways it intersects with health. Hunger can worsen chronic conditions, diminish quality of life, and cause higher healthcare costs and more frequent visits to the emergency room. The Greater Boston Food Bank's 2025 statewide food access report found that 40% of adults in food insecure households rated their health as fair or poor, compared with just 17% of adults in food secure households. It may not be intuitive to some why a food bank is interested in food allergies, but if you're a parent, you're acutely aware of the impact food has on your child, and you are vigilant about allergies, especially in early childhood. As you may know, last week, the Greater Boston Food Bank announced the launch of the groundbreaking Takeda Center for Community Health and Nutrition. The new center will build on GBFB's leadership in this area, addressing the long-term health of our communities through food insecurity research, data-driven approaches to hunger relief, and key partnerships with leaders in the healthcare industry. This evening, we will hear from two leading experts from the Food Allergy Science Initiative. The initiative imagines a world without food allergies and has created a new field of research that is charting a path towards a cure. Our speakers tonight will share some of the research findings and help us understand how food insecurity and food allergies are closely linked. Households with food allergies are more likely to experience food insecurity, and in turn, food insecurity can make food allergy management more difficult. Our first speaker, Dr. Carlos Bosques, is the CEO of the Food Allergy Science Initiative and a friend of GBFB. For 20 years, he has developed new medical tools and treatments in his leading nationwide network work to make care better for people with food allergies. Our second speaker, Dr. Andrew Wang, is an assistant professor in the Department of Internal Medicine and Immunobiology at Yale School of Medicine. His research examines how the environment around us impacts inflammation in the body and how it plays a role in illnesses like serious infections, allergies, immune disorders, and depressions. Before we bring Carlos on, if you have any questions during the program, please enter them in the chat feature. After the program, we will have a Q&A segment and we'll answer questions then. And with that, please welcome Dr. Carlos Bosques.
Thank you, Joy and Jennifer, for that kind introduction. It's a real honor to be here with our friends from the Greater Boston Food Bank, and an honor to come today to really share a little bit more information about the Food Allergy Science Initiative, or FASI, how we call it for short. So real pleasure to be here tonight. The foundation of the Food Allergy Science Initiative, it's really based on one principle. And that is that in order to cure a disease, you need to understand it at its roots. And in a simple way, when we think about food allergies, the roots of food allergies lies in dissecting how food interacts with the human body. So in essence, when we think about the Food Allergy Science Initiative and FASI, what we've been doing and what our investigators have been doing is primarily understanding and dissecting how the food interacts with the human body. Next slide. So most of you may be very familiar with food insecurity, which is defined as the limited or uncertain access to adequate, safe, and nutritious food due to financial or structural constraints. And there's approximately 40 million people are expected in the United States in households living with food insecurity. That is about 1 in 7 Americans that experience food insecurity. That is actually approximately 2 million people in Massachusetts, or 1 in 3. And for many families, food insecurities are further complicated by another growing condition, which is food allergies. Next slide. So there are about 33 million people just in the United States living with food allergies. And in a simple definition, food allergies can be defined as a chronic immune-mediated disease that requires strict dietary abundance, constant vigilance, access to emergency medication. But food allergies are really an epidemic, and it continues to grow. Over the last 2 decades, there has been an increase of 300% just in the last 2 decades. When we think globally, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people living with food allergies, and just continues to grow. Especially an important question that we've been asking ourselves at the Food Allergy Science Initiative is why this condition continues to grow so rapidly over the last decades. And we'll actually talk, my colleague, Dr. Wang, will talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. But when food insecurity and food allergy converge, there's actually what I call a compounded vulnerability. And what do I mean by that? Food allergies increase the risk of food insecurity, and food insecurity worsens the allergy management and health outcomes. Specifically, there's the households with food allergic children are about 1.5 to 3 times more likely to experience food insecurity. And the risks are highest among low-income families, Black, Hispanics households, and single-parent households. And so this creates what I call a bidirectional, self-enforcing cycle, which really compounds the problem. Next slide. And so this is probably obvious, right? Why food allergies increase food insecurity. Food allergy management often structurally conflicts with affordability and access. As we know, higher costs of foods for food allergic individuals, it's a major challenge. Allergen-free foods frequently cost 2 to 3 times more than the standard average food, and there's limited generic store brands options. So specialized manufacturing increases the cost. So not something that is just marketing, but it's really also a burden on the manufacturers. And some examples include milk-free formulas, wheat-free staples, nut-free packages, foods. Next slide. So our foundation, the foundation of FOSSI, or the Food Allergy Science Initiative, was to uncover the underlying biology of food allergies, and more broadly, to understand how food interacts with the human body. Next slide. What do I mean by that? Decoding, one of the things that our investigators have been doing for the last decade is decoding how food gut brain communication happens. How are those components intertwined and how they communicate with each other? What we eat is one of the most powerful environmental exposures shaping human health. That's something that we all know, we've heard about. And so our investigators are really dissecting the different components of that interaction or that communication, including how the food is sensed by our body and how it makes that quick, rapid, and sometimes dangerous decision of what is a friend or a foe. Is something dangerous or is it something nutritious? How food interacts with the microbiome and the resulting metabolites from the processing of that microbiome of food that may lead to beneficial or detrimental reactions. How does the cells, the immune cells, sense allergens? We're learning a lot about that. But more broadly, how food chemicals, not only the allergens, but how food chemicals interact with the gut and the brain, and how do they communicate with each other to decide how to react to food, and to initiate a complex mechanisms that in some cases lead to the development of chronic disorders that we don't know about immediately because it takes all that chronic exposure over decades to really develop some of these chronic disorders like food allergies and many other diseases of the immune system. And my colleague, Dr. Wang, will be telling you more about this. Next slide. So who's FOSSI? What makes us unique? The foundation of FOSSI, the idea was science is limited in this space, funding is limited in this space. So we must roll up our sleeves, put the investment, put the research, and do the work. And the idea was to bring the best minds of the world together from different disciplines: immunology, neuroscience, gastroenterology, microbiology, chemistry, clinical research, and drug discovery. Bring them together as a collaborative team, very tight network of collaborative team, to try to address all these different components of the science. And so we are very excited to share that we have now assembled a team of close to 100 scientists that work collaboratively on a daily basis from the top institutions of the United States and actually in the world, to work together to try to solve these kinds of questions. Next slide. I'm very excited to share, especially this year. It's a very special year for FOSSI. It is our 10-year anniversary, our decade. We're celebrating our decade of research. And over the last decade, these are some of the exciting accomplishments that we've been able to achieve. Our investigators have uncovered approximately 145 discoveries that are now documented in peer-reviewed publications in top journals, filed 12 patents. We've actually deployed over $50 million in research. All the funding that we receive is completely 100% dedicated to research. And we funded now over 140 different projects and working with 24 world-class organizations. So we're very excited what we've been able to achieve over the last 10 years, but more importantly, working with top scientists like Dr. Andrew Wang, who have been able to make this progress and are uncovering the challenges of not only food allergies, but exactly dissecting how food interacts with our bodies and what are the implications of that. Next slide. So today I'm very honored to introduce one of our principal investigators and professor at Yale School of Medicine, Dr. Andrew Wang. Dr. Andrew Wang has made great clinical and scientific contributions to the field of autoimmune diseases. His lab focuses on understanding how the environment and the food impacts the trajectory of inflammatory diseases. Specifically, one area of research in Dr. Wang's laboratory is how the chemicals we ingest may act as adjuvants. And I'm not sure if you've heard the word adjuvant before, but adjuvants are defined as agents that enhance our immune system. Great example of adjuvants are what manufacturers include in vaccines. In order for vaccines to act, they need additional chemicals called adjuvants to enhance the response of the immune system. And some of the work that Dr. Wang is doing is leading us to understand how chemicals that are incorporated into our food system may act as adjuvants or enhancers of the immune system. But one of the most important facts that I like about Dr. Andrew Wang is that I can actually say he can walk the talk. He actually lives in his farm. This is actually some of the photos of his farm. So he's not only doing the research, but he's also living the science and really promoting the healthy foods for our system. So with that, I'll stop and I'll pass it on to Dr. Andrew Wang.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for that extraordinarily kind introduction, Carlos. A great thank you to the Greater Boston Food Bank for hosting us, and a really big thank you to the FASI Food Allergy Science Initiative for their many years of support for scientists like me, who without support from FASI would not be able to do the kind of research that we do, because generally speaking, it's pretty risky research that we can't get funded in other ways. I thought what I would do tonight is share a couple vignettes of things that we recently found with regards to our desire to understand how food interacts with our body. That would not have been possible without the support of FASI. And I wanted to start first with a personal anecdote for how I got involved in food allergy research to begin with, which is actually my son, my oldest son, developed. I was actually a resident in the CCU, and my wife called in a panic because he basically had an anaphylactic response at one of the pick your own farms in Connecticut. And so decided that it would be probably important to understand the causes of food allergy, and this then led us down a big rabbit hole of trying to understand how food interacts with us in general. So the first point I wanted to make, and Carlos touched on this briefly, is our understanding of food science is probably in its very early days. And so what I have on this slide is the most recent kind of treatment of what makes, quote, a good diet. And this was from an article that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine just last year. And where we are now is what I would consider to be in a phenomenology phase where it's quite descriptive, not particularly precise, and certainly there's very little detail beyond what you are looking at here, with whether or not things have more or less of certain things, what combinations they're in, and kind of, I would argue, very kind of crude ways of understanding exactly what in food is good or bad. And so one goal of my laboratory and many others within the FASI consortium is to understand really basic things in a very detailed way about how food interacts with us. And so that's the first vignette that I wanted to share with the audience here. Next slide, please. So how we got into this was actually a couple of reasons. One is it's very clear that your health, what you eat, and your immune system are all intimately connected. And so we were actually looking to try to understand a very basic question of whether or not there are immune cells that live inside the brain. So not in the fluid around the brain, but in the brain itself. And so what you're seeing here on the left is a mouse brain where we lit up all of the types of immune cells we were interested in, cleared the entire brain, and then imaged it, the entire brain in 3D so we can reconstruct the entire brain and all of the cells that we're interested in throughout the entire mouse brain. And what we found was that the immune cells are in fact inside the brain, and they're isolated in certain areas of the brain and anatomic parts of the brain. And these parts of the brain happen to control hunger and thirst. And so then using a mouse as kind of a wayfinder, what you're looking at on the right is human brains that we got from the hospital shortly after patients died in the hospital and agreed to donate their bodies to science. And we looked in the parts of the brain that we found in the mice to see if we could find evidence that these cells were also present in human brains, and they are absolutely there. I do want to give credit where credit is due, and so this beautiful work was done by Tomomi, who's now continuing her work at UCSF, a close collaborator and neurologist, David Hafler. And then the reason I have a picture of my older daughter with a chicken is these immune cells were originally discovered in chickens, and an observation was made more than 40 years ago that immune cells in chickens also were in anatomically localized areas. And so we were a bit rediscovering what was discovered in the past. But a lot of the inspiration came from having a couple hundred chickens on the farm. Next slide, please. The real surprise was when we were trying to figure out where these cells came from. And on the left cluster of panels, what I'm showing you is a healthy human who donated their cerebral spinal fluid. So they got a spinal tap, which in this way we can look at cells that are in the central nervous system. Also donated parts of their gut through endoscopy, and then blood. And because these immune cells are distinct in ways that we can measure, we can track individual ones. And what we found was that the immune cells that are in the brain are also in the gut. And then using mouse models, then we demonstrated that the immune cells from the brain actually come from the gut. And so it led to a very obvious question of, if they come from the gut, can they be changed by diet, and can they be changed if you remove food, which is something that we've been talking about today in terms of food insecurity. And what you can appreciate on the right here is that if you put animals on a high-fat diet, you increase the number of cells in the fat as you would expect. You also increase the number of cells that are in the brain. And then when you remove food from them, you further increase the number of cells in the brain because they become liberated from the fat that has to get burned to keep enough nutrients in your body alive. So essentially what we've found is the idea that that there is constant communication between the immune system as a cellular conduit between the gut and the brain, telling the brain what the gut is experiencing, passing on information in this way, and that what you eat and your nutritional status affects really the cellular composition of your brain. And so we're now very interested in trying to understand across health and disease span whether or not the gut is the source for all these kind of cells that we find in the brain across these different conditions, and whether or not they can be contributing to disease processes, because this is something that normally occurs both in mice and in humans. The next vignette I wanted to share with you, next slide, please, is on our efforts to try to understand what makes a good diet, which I kind of alluded to in the first slide. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Both this study and the study before were published last year. And so for those of you who are interested, the citations are in the bottom right, and you can find more details. But the inspiration for this study came from two physician scientists also who were supported by FOSSI. On the left is Nikolai, who's an endocrinologist scientist, and on the right is Joe, who's a psychiatrist scientist. And they were interested basically in trying to understand if what one would normally consider as a healthy diet, and in this case, what we were interested in were in high protein diets, is always a, quote, good diet, depending on what the animal is experiencing. And this is particularly clinically relevant because when patients are very sick in intensive care, they lose a lot of muscle in their critical illness. And for many decades, we've been feeding them high protein diets, thinking that that would help them rebuild their muscle that they're losing from critical illness. And so on the very left, Nikolai and Joe did a very simple experiment in mice where we made them critically ill, but not so ill that they couldn't still pick what they wanted to eat, and made the astonishing finding that animals who are acutely sick don't like to eat high protein diets. In the middle set of diagrams, what they then found was that the reason they don't like to eat this is as soon as they taste it, they activate centers in the back of the brain that are responsible for mediating aversion and disgust. And so you can see in the most bottom panel labeled protein, there's a lot more red dots, and each red dot is a neuron being activated. So in these experiments, they gave the animals exactly the same amount of calories of protein or fat or sugar. And you can see that animals, specifically in this kind of sickness state, activate disgust centers in their brain. And in the right, they identified the components within food, within protein, that mediate this aversion and disgust normally. And what's very striking about this is that the aversion to protein only happens in this kind of sickness state. And in this case, they made the animals starving. And in that setting, they actually prefer foods that lack these particular components in protein. And so one thing that we're very interested in trying to develop, next slide, please, is trying to understand basically what makes a good diet in various circumstances. Ideally, we would systematically try to understand what makes a good diet in every kind of physiologic state. I'm just putting up here a snapshot of all of the clinical trials that have been done in the last 6 years or so, trying to understand whether or not, how much, how little, and when, and how we should feed patients who can't otherwise choose for themselves what they want to eat in the critical illness setting. And so even these basic questions like what should a patient be fed optimally for a good diet remain unknown, and it's through efforts supported by FOSSI and others that are really trying to get at these basic understandings of food and how they interact with us in different health states. The final vignette, which Carlos mentioned a couple times, is next slide, please, is I think a little bit easier to understand, at least intuitively, which is there's a very clear understanding of what makes a bad diet. And that seems to be in highly processed foods. And so what I'm showing here is a summary of a large body of studies done internationally where the consumption of ultra-processed food is associated with basically all the kind of modern diseases that we have. These are obesity, cardiovascular disease. You can see the list here. So what we were trying to then understand is whether or not this may be playing a role in food allergy. And next slide, please. What's very clear in food allergy and in autoimmune diseases, which are very similar to food allergies, because in autoimmune diseases, the immune system starts to attack you, which it's not supposed to do, as opposed to bacteria and viruses, which is what it's supposed to do. And in food allergy, your immune system is attacking food, which it shouldn't do, because food is good, right? So what's very clear in both autoimmunity and food allergy is that they occur primarily in modern industrial countries. And when you look even within countries, which is what's highlighted here on the right, in these red boxes, the increase in the prevalence of autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and in food allergy occurs exclusively in urban areas within the same country. And so, next slide, please. And so we asked the question, basically, since urban areas also contain much easier access to processed food and at the same time over-the-counter medications and other kinds of chemicals that are less common in rural areas, coupled with the fact that food allergies really are a modern disease that arose really past the 1940s, when a lot of these chemicals were being introduced into our food supply. Whether or not some of these chemicals could have these adjuvant properties that Carlos was mentioning earlier. So the basic idea was very simple, which is food normally when you eat it, you don't make an immune response to it because that's not what's supposed to happen. So maybe there's something that's being added into modern food that's more prevalent in urban areas that has these properties that enhance immune responses and now are instructing the immune system to view the food protein as being something that's dangerous and hence forming an immune response to it. Next slide, please. And so what we did here was quite simple. We basically fed animals egg protein, and egg allergy is fairly common in the United States and worldwide. And we screened many of the additives that the FDA here allows to be added to food for preserving its freshness or longevity, taste qualities, etc., to look to see if we could generate food allergies in mice against egg protein. And so in the center panel, you can see we did this batch screening thing where we looked at food labels of highly processed peanut butter that essentially lasts forever and looked to see all the things that are typically added into them and other food groups. And then we just looked to see if we could generate food allergy in mice in these batches. And what you can see on the right here is after we put these compounds with egg into the mice, we exposed them to the egg protein again, and they generated, two of the groups generated an allergic response, which is characterized in mice by a big drop in body temperature. And so we knew that something in the peanut butter and the dairy and egg group was doing this. Next slide, please. And so then what we ended up doing was we looked at all of them individually within those batches and identified single compounds that are added to our processed food that essentially make the proteins within the food now become something that's allergenic. And so this is beautiful work that's we're trying to get published now, done by Izzy, who's now a medical student at UPenn, and Anna, who joined the faculty in the Department of Dermatology. So one such chemical is fairly common as a fat stabilizer. It's present in things from Cheez-Its to Pop-Tarts and to the oils that are added into baby formula. This is the TBHQ compound. And you can see that Animals, if you give them egg protein with this compound and then challenge them with egg protein, will drop a lot of body temperature, like I showed you in the previous slide. They spill allergenic inflammatory compounds into the blood, which is the center panel, the MCP1, and then they generate high amounts of antibodies towards egg protein, which they should not do. And they do this only when you have this chemical added to the food as well. And so we're in the process of trying to understand the extent to which industrial compounds have these adjuvant properties as one contributor to the modern epidemic of food allergy. Next slide, please. So I just want to end by acknowledging all the people that have made this work possible, in particular, the support of FOSI. As Carlos mentioned, since my son developed food allergies and since we made these findings now 4 years ago or so, we have vastly changed the way that we live. And so we grow most of the food that we eat. And so those are the pictures on the left, and on the right is my amazing laboratory and the people who do all the amazing work. And I want to thank in particular my mentorship, and in particular Ruslan Medzatov, who also is one of the founders of FOSI. And so with that, I'm very happy to discuss further with this audience.
Thank you both for that presentation. It was really, really fascinating and encouraging, and it's exciting to see what FOSI is doing as a group and all the researchers that they are supporting. So thank you for that. We do have a bunch of questions coming in. So I'm going to start off the first one for either one of you. What are some of the common misconceptions about food allergies that are important for the food access community to understand?
Great question, Joy. I would probably say a few things that come to mind, and Andrew, if you have any additional thoughts, but I think for this community especially, and I think community in general that are not completely familiar with food allergies, I think one misconception is that, food allergies are just preference, just a preference for picky eaters, and it's not a serious life-threatening condition. And I think probably the other thing may be more of the amounts, that small amounts are probably not as dangerous, right? That just a small amount, it's okay. It's funny because this is an issue that the scientific community and even the FDA has been trying to address what's the right thresholds of amounts of allergens, and it's very difficult because everyone is different, and there are many cases where just very minute amounts can really trigger a devastating allergic reaction. We have one of our colleagues, his wife is allergic. He has shared is allergic to latex, for example, and he said he cannot get in. She cannot get into a room, not even touching it, but not in a room where latex is present. So that gives you an idea of the sensitivity for an allergic reaction. And so I think that's one of the misconceptions, that small amounts are not a big issue and that it's just more about preference and picky eaters. And that those are probably two that come to mind, but I'm sure there are many others.
Thank you. Andrew, do you have anything to add?
I think the other misconception may be that food allergy always has to look like anaphylaxis. And from a clinical perspective, anaphylaxis is kind of the most extreme. So anaphylaxis is when you eat something, your lips swell, your throat tightens, you can't breathe, and this is what makes food allergies fatal. But this is a very extreme clinical presentation. Milder presentations can just be rash, kind of gastrointestinal distress. And so I think a good conventional wisdom is to listen to one's body, and this can be particularly problematic in folks who have limited options because of food insecurity issues. And so it's certainly a big problem, and it seems like a problem that the Greater Boston Food Bank is also very interested in trying to help solve, because choice is very important, especially when certain foods make you feel bad.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. The food bank prides itself on providing a high percentage of their foods, a third of the foods, as fresh produce. And as a dietitian, I'm always thinking about single ingredient foods, because you know that they're safe. You either can or can't eat them. And the food bank works really hard to provide, fresh perishable foods, including, meats and dairies that are as clean as possible. So having access to healthy foods is certainly helpful for the food allergy community, for sure. Speaking of popular food allergy, there's a question here from someone who serves food in a public school system. Question is, in the popular press, I read that peanut allergies have lessened in recent years. Is no peanuts a good policy?
Andrew, you want to take that first?
So maybe just comment on I think the increase in food allergy looks like it's plateauing. Maybe a different way to describe the premise of the question. A lot of that has to do with a change in how we introduce potential food allergens. When I was in medical school, it was food allergens should be avoided until a later age. I guess this dates me a little bit in terms of how old I am, but more recent studies clearly show that you should try to introduce these potential food allergens as early as possible into a child, because then the immune system of the child essentially learns that this is not something that's bad. And so that intervention and the uptake in the clinical community and in advising within nutritionists and allergists and so forth probably is what's flattening the curve there. I don't. That would be how I would think about this. I'm sure there are other explanations for it.
I would agree. I think the change from the idea that newborns should be and young children should avoid access to allergens, to more of an promoting early introduction and a wide diversity of foods at an early age. Seems like the readout just came out recently of a long study that was done, and the 10-year, I think, readout came out recently, showing that it does actually helps. It helps train the immune system so that you don't react to allergens. So that has changed, and that's helping. Now at a later age, and in terms of no peanut policy in schools and airplanes, things like that is probably a different case where you may have sensitive people where they may be in a particular environment where access to a emergency therapy may not be as available. And in those cases, you want to be as careful as possible, because as we said, the thresholds to trigger responses, devastating responses, are different for different people. So that it's more about safety in terms about reduction and prevention than the early introduction of food has been. It's actually showing to be a great opportunity to change the landscape of food allergies.
Okay, thank you for those answers. Switching gears a little bit, there's a question wondering about funding. You mentioned that funding is limited for this type of research. Attendee is wondering who is funding this work and what is motivating them to do so.
Well, I can probably take that. I think I've been really honored to work with trailblazers, really courageous families. FASI was founded based on the courage and the adversity of 6 families from the Boston area that decided to not only commit to doing the work, but also to initiate the funding. So PASI, at least in particular, has been philanthropically funded, primarily philanthropically funded for the last decade. Up to last year, it was 100% philanthropically funded, and now we also have some grants, scientific grants from the government, from NIH and NIAID. But so the funding that is happening is through mainly people that are committed to solving the issue, that are putting the energy and the resources to work so that scientists, smart, brilliant minds can actually do the work that is needed to tackle the problem.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. That's helpful. New question for Andrew. Can manufacturers use a different compound than the one you identified as allergenic?
It's a complicated question. I can answer it in a couple of parts. I guess the first would be that how food additives are assessed in terms of their effects on our bodies is not particularly robust, nor is it particularly transparent. So, for example, some of the food additives that we identified as being adjuvants are actually not legal in Europe and in Asia, just as an example. And so there's discrepancy across the world here in the different health agencies, regulatory agencies that opine and regulate food safety on the same compound being safe or not, which tells you that there's something not quite right here about that the science is not rigorous. Let's put it that way. I think it's related to the second part of the answer to the question, which is that until we understand the kind of biochemical properties of what makes these compounds particularly allergy inducing, it's not intuitive how you would design something else that has the property that you want, which is preserved food, and not the property of activating the immune system. I would say, as a general rule of thumb, food that never expires, one could wonder whether or not that is food at all.
Thank you for that. It is certainly complicated, and there's a lot of food additives in our food supply. So you've got a lot of work ahead of you, I think. So we have a question here about culturally relevant foods, and I know at the food bank they really strive to have a large variety of foods to and ensure people have access to foods that are culturally familiar to them. Question is, so we focus on offering culturally relevant foods at our soup kitchen. Is consuming food that typically grows in that geographical area where you grew up relevant to this sort of research?
So it's a question that several of us are very, very interested in, which is essentially if there is a biological basis for cuisine. The first slide that I put up on the reviewing diets includes things like Mediterranean diets and other geographically typical sets of ways of preparing food and the types of food that the types of things that you put into the cuisine. I think there's accumulating evidence that there are certainly preferences to certain kinds of food and how the food is prepared, and that those can be genetically encoded. And so I think as more and more people really dig into this very basic question of is it that cuisine is just you have all this stuff here that happens to grow and you make the best of it? Or is it actually something about your biology that is compelling you to make food a certain way because it interacts with your body in a way that makes you feel better, makes you healthier, makes you flourish? And so I think having a lot of options and then the ability for people at the food bank to pick what kind of makes them feel the best probably is the right way to go. But again, the science here is very young.
Yes, thank you for that. And it's a fascinating area for sure. The field of genetics, right, is involved in this research, I'm guessing. Okay. So we have time for one more question. And if you have any additional questions to the audience, you are welcome to email them to events@gbfb.org. There was a question about GLP-1s, the new class of drugs for weight loss, wondering if there's any impacts or how they impact the brain and hunger. And that may not be entirely appropriate for this conversation, but I know, it's had the GLP-1s have had far-reaching effects in terms of behaviors around food and substances. And I'm wondering if if allergies have been part of this conversation.
The short answer is in the second vignette I presented the part of the brain that I presented, which for those in the audience that were looking at the labels there, it is the area postrema in the nucleus of the tracts solitarius, which is where the neurons that are engaged by GLP-1 agonists live. And these are the same parts of the brain that mediate aversion and disgust. And so the way that we think GLP-1s are primarily working is by making one not want to eat as a direct effect on this part of the brain. And other FOSI investigators who were part of this study as well have looked at other factors made during allergy and allergic inflammation. Those signals also seem, many of the signals that mediate this kind of don't eat or stay away from this seem to be converging on this part of the brain. And so I would not be surprised if with the widespread use of GLP-1s that there will be some epidemiologic associations that are made. I'm sure Carlos has thoughts on this as well.
No, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. It's new. It's a lot of provocative information that is emerging, and that's one of the things that, at least as a scientist, I love to see from researchers like Andrew, just peeling the onion and learning new connections that we were just not aware of. I think especially when this all connects, we talk about the food-gut-brain communication. One of the biggest surprises have been for FOSI investigators has been that, in the past, food allergies were just considered a problem of the immune system. And I get, when you think about it, especially with the speed of the response, I always think about it in a very simple terms, which is the component of the human body that was designed to act fast and for fast reactions, and it's more of the nervous system. And so like this example that Andrew's talking about, those communications are intertwined between the immune and the nervous system, and bringing minds like Andrew are really now uncovering and teasing apart all of that. So I'm excited. Next 5 years we'll have a lot of that understanding, and hopefully we can talk for 2 hours about GLP-1s and how those new communications that they're unraveling right now.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer from both of you guys. So it is time for us to wrap up the Q&A. I want to thank you, Dr. Bosques and Dr. Wang. And I just want to add that I'm struck by the scientific premise that you've shared with us. Specifically, what we eat is one of the most powerful environmental exposures shaping human health. Here at GBFB, we've long believed that food is medicine and that access to nutritious foods can change lives. It's why nearly 1/3 of all the food we distribute is fresh produce, why we hired a Mass General Brigham doctor and full-time dietitians, and why we recently launched the Takeda Center for Community Health and Nutrition. It's exciting to know how many partners we have in this work and to see the great strides you and your team have made in helping us understand the power of access to healthy food. A healthier Eastern Massachusetts is achievable if we work together. Thank you all for your support tonight. At this time, I'd like to invite up our Women Fighting Hunger co-chairs, Jennifer Harrington and Yanya Schaefer, to close out our program.
Thank you. Thanks, Joy, for a great discussion and for all of the attendees. Thank you for participating so earnestly. A special thanks to Dr. Bosques and Dr. Wang, and we want to express our immense gratitude again to MassBio for hosting us tonight. So thank you, and to Biogen for their generous support of tonight's event.
And we would love for you to stay connected with us. So please join us on LinkedIn. You might have seen the QR code in the opening slideshow. If you didn't, you can reach out to contact events at GBFB. So you can join our Women Fighting Hunger group to stay updated on future events, some of which will be in person, we hope, weather permitting. And thank you all so much for supporting the Greater Boston Food Bank's work to end hunger in Eastern Massachusetts. Access to food fosters positive health outcomes, creates stability and dignity, and gives everyone a chance to thrive. Thank you again for being part of that collective effort, and have a wonderful evening.